about setting the scene from a global perspective. James Stacey.
Thank you. Morning, everyone. Morning, Minister. Pleasure to be here, and thank you very much for the invitation to join. It's always good to have an excuse as well to come home and to participate in the discussion on tourism here in Ireland. This morning, as Olivia mentioned, I've been asked to say some words about to bring an international view to the discussion. The issue of sustainability is one which is not just on the agenda here in Ireland, the tourism sector, but across many different countries and across the economies of many different countries. So it's a discussion and something we're working on within the OECD with our member countries. So I'd like to, I'll bring some of the thoughts from that work to share with you today. But I think perhaps first it may be useful to say some words about the OECD, to say some words about our work on tourism for those of you who may not be familiar with it. The OECD works with, I think I have some slides. Yeah. So the OECD works with member and partner countries to support and improve policy making, including in the area of tourism development. And we do this by carrying out research and analysis, by sharing good practices, and by making policy recommendations to governments of steps that they could take. And the organisation effectively works as a global knowledge network of sharing practices, sharing experiences, sharing learnings. And it brings together the 36 member countries of the OECD, including Ireland, which is a founding member of the organisation. Colombia is about to become another member, but we also engage more widely with countries around the world. So OECD has been involved in tourism issues since the organisation was established, so since 1948. The Tourism Committee was set up to support the reconstruction of Europe after the war. So this is how long the organisation has been working on these issues. We recently had went through our archives, and I don't know whether it was a little bit scary, but sustainability was being discussed back then as well. So many of the same issues have been coming up over the last 70 years, but they are evolving. And I think, the discussion is evolving, but we still have some fundamental issues there within the sector. As I said, tourism is Ireland is a founding member and actively engages in the OECD's work on tourism. And I suppose to make a bit of a link as well between my intervention today, which is very much at the policy level and at an international level, and the interventions by the Minister and by Ruth as well, and particularly to the industry within the room. So within OECD we work with governments in terms of supporting their development of tourism policy. So within the Tourism Committee we are discussing these issues around sustainability, around climate change, around digitalisation, around investment, competitiveness, all these aspects that are important to the industry. And we work with, in the case of Ireland, the department here, the department colleagues, in terms of feeding into for example, the action plan that the Minister mentioned. There's work happening in the OECD on sustainability, on managing tourism growth, managing development issues around over-tourism. So I think that makes the link in terms of the discussion here today as well. And how it's relevant also to the discussion today. In terms of how we work on tourism, it's very much from an economic development perspective, and the organisation promotes an integrated approach to tourism development. And this comes back to this issue that tourism is impacted by policies in other areas, which I think have already come through in the interventions already this morning. But tourism also has an impact on other parts of the economy, on other parts of society. So we really need, as governments, to be working in a whole of government approach. So when we're talking about investment, when we're talking about transport, which the Minister mentioned, the project 2040, are we in the tourism sector influencing, feeding in sufficiently into those wider plans of government in other areas, that we don't remain focused on just our sector, that we see our sector within the wider policy agenda, within the wider economy, within the wider society. So this is very much the approach that the OECD advocates in terms of tourism development. Statistics, which Olivia mentioned, this is a key part of our work, and I think we're all in the room very aware that we need to be very much show the importance of our sector and bring evidence to support action. We have a global forum on tourism statistics, which is currently being involved into a global forum on tourism statistics, policies and knowledge. The name keeps changing. But part of the rationale for evolving this forum is to have a platform to better engage with industry. So to bring industry more into the discussions that we're having in the OECD, because we very much see that a strong dialogue between government, between industry, between civil society is very important if we are going to achieve this aim of promoting sustainable growth in our sector, and that we have growth, tourism growth that benefits people, that benefits places, and that benefits businesses. So I think the forum like this one here today is very important for this, to bringing together different stakeholders to discuss these issues, to identify common solutions and to identify joint responses so we're all working in the same direction. To say another word on the economic impact of our sector, this is a sector which is important not just in tourism in Ireland but also in other countries, and if we look across the OECD area, the data shows that on average tourism directly contributes 4% of GDP, 6% of employment and 21% of service exports in the OECD area. So it's an important economic sector in many countries. And it's important for us as a sector to demonstrate the size and the value of the tourism economy. One thing that we are seeing at an international level is that the strategic role tourism plays in national economies is more and more recognised by governments. So just last week, Japan, which is not necessarily, which is a major global economy, Japan hosted a meeting of the G20 tourism ministers. So this is the first time that the tourism ministers of the G20 countries met formally within the G20 framework. There were 6 formal meetings this year within the G20 framework. Agriculture, finance, and tourism was one. So that shows the importance that Japan and other G20 countries are putting on the tourism sector. So that sends a strong signal at a global level. And tourism was mentioned in the final leaders' declaration from the G20. And actually the focus of the discussions in Japan last week were on sustainability, so on the same discussion that we're having here today in Killarney. But very much if we as a sector are to be taken seriously as a driver of economic development, we need to be better at demonstrating the economic value of tourism, and this is behind the work that the OECD has been doing over years on the development of tourism satellite accounts, so this is a methodology that's been developed by OECD together with the World Tourism Organization and Eurostat. And this is a chart just to see if everyone's awake. So this chart, I just wanted to mention some more recent work we're doing on trade in value added, because I think it might be of interest to the room. It is quite complex. My colleagues who build this framework have explained it to me multiple times. I think I'm beginning to understand it more now. So this is a rather busy slide, but let me explain. So a common metric that we use in tourism for measuring tourism performance is the level of expenditure by international visitors to the country. However, not all of these expenditures generate value in the Irish economy. So if we take, for example, a French visitor to Killarney buys a souvenir t-shirt. Okay, portion of this expenditure stays in Ireland, but some of it goes to China, where the t-shirt was made. Some of the expenditure, the value added from that expenditure, goes to the United States, where the cotton has come from, and so forth. So the OECD, together with the World Trade Organization, has developed a framework more broadly to see where trade really generates value. And this links in with the discussion around Apple products and so forth. That's normally the example that you hear. But I think the message I wanted to bring from this work that we have been doing is that euro for euro, the tourism exports generate relatively more value for OECD economies, and if we look at the Irish economy data, for the Irish economy compared with overall exports. So if you look within the OECD area as a whole, for every €1 spent by international tourists, this generates 89 cents in value added in domestic economy. The comparative data for overall exports is 81 cents. So tourism is contributing more to the domestic economy than the exports as a whole from the economy. In Ireland, the figures are about from every €1 spent by an international tourist generates 73% in value to the Irish economy, which would be expected as a smaller economy. We'd expect that to be a little bit lower. There might be a bit more leakage from the economy. But the comparison, which I think is the important one, is that 73 cents compares with 60 cents from exports overall. So I will caveat that these are estimates based on available data, but this is a framework which is being developed and it is published data. But I think the message is that tourism makes a greater contribution to the domestic economy compared with other exports. This is something which I think we in tourism are very aware of, but it comes back to this point that we need to have more evidence to support these discussions, because when we're talking with ministries of finance and so forth, it's that hard evidence that really speaks. So I think this is some of the work that we are doing, and hence I thought I'd share a scary slide, but just wanted to mention. So I think coming back then to the discussion, to what I've actually been asked to talk about. I wanted to share some work we've been doing in the OECD on the mega trends that are likely to impact tourism between now and 2040. So we've heard the industry in terms of the coming years. One thing that countries had been asking us to do at the OECD was to actually take a reflection and not just have the UNWTO have projected tourist numbers, so quantitative projections up to 2030. But what we've been doing in the OECD is having more qualitative reflection in terms of what could tourism look like globally in 2040, and how are we preparing now in our policies, in our industry decisions, to how are we preparing for that possible. A key takeaway from that work is that we in tourism really need to be more actively thinking about the different ways the future may look, and preparing for what my strategic foresight colleagues term alternative futures or alternative realities. So we have a strategic foresight team in the OECD that have been working with us on this. I think it's fair to say that frequently the private sector is ahead of policy makers on this. And so I think that comes back to the issue in terms of we need to work together. This is not something government can do, this is not something industry can do alone. It's very much a collaborative approach, and we need to work closely together. So I'd like to maybe talk through some of the what has been coming through in this work. Sustainability is a key pillar, but actually in reality all of these pillars are very much interlinked. They're not discrete. So I think to start with the sustainability issue, given that this is really the core of our discussion today, globally tourism has had a very steady, very rapid growth trajectory over the last 60 years. It really has been quite exponential, and this is forecast to continue to rise to 1.8 billion by 2030. This brings new opportunities, but it also, if unchecked, this growth will also risks leading to significant economic, environmental and social impacts. And this is already the case in some destinations. Heavy visitor flows are putting pressure on infrastructure, on environment, on local communities. But we have other places that are struggling to realise their tourism potential. So we really need to have better solutions to manage this tourism growth. And this is going to be very important if we're going to manage this growth also sustainably, and really comes back to the competitiveness issue. It really is core. We've had quite a lot of focus on economic issues in tourism, environmental issues more recently, but I think the social pillar is one where more attention is needed. This is a very complex issue. The tourism is heavily dependent on natural resources and can help finance and protect these resources. It can increase their value added. But tourism also contributes to the depletion of these resources. So if we look at aviation emissions, for example, if we're thinking in the context of climate change, these are forecast to triple by 2035, and aviation accounts for around 3/4 of tourism's global carbon footprint. We'll have more discussion on this afternoon, but I think just wanted to mention and reiterate the point that's already been made this morning, but that tourism has a role to play in the transition to the low carbon economy. Yes, there is this issue in terms of aviation emissions. It's particularly a challenge for a country like Ireland, where air access is so important as an island. This is something, for example, we were discussing last month with the Environmental Commissioner for New Zealand. New Zealand positions itself very much as a green, sustainable destination, but its markets are long haul, and the aviation emissions are a huge issue as well. So I think we have two issues in terms of getting to the destination and when we are in the destination. And I don't think we should be I think we should continue to contribute to that discussion on aviation emissions, but I think that we also need to be looking at in our destination as well, what can we as a sector be doing. Tourism also puts pressure on water resources, Food production is another issue. Hotels and restaurants can influence waste minimisation, sustainable food production, local supply chains. I think these are all issues, we're coming back to the issue of food later on today as well. One thing we looked at in this work was scenarios. What could the future look like? We could move to a scenario where sustainable tourism is a niche sector. Only the wealthy can afford to do it. You continue with this destructive mass tourism, and you have this sustainable tourism niche sector, and environmental pressures have destroyed many destinations, many key tourism hotspot sites. An alternative scenario could see us move to a situation where destinations are really taking sustainability seriously, not just lip service, but really taking it seriously. And the industry is very much moving towards resource efficient, low carbon operations. And again, this is something where we'll have practical examples this afternoon as well in terms of what's happening in industry at the moment. And I think already the announcement this morning in terms of the initiative here in Killarney in terms of the sustainability in hotels, these are all steps in that direction. But thinking about the different scenarios is a useful tool to help answer the question as to what we in industry can do. So one clear area is policymakers, industry and local communities need to be working more closely together to develop a common vision for the sector. Where do we want the sector to be in 2025, in 2040? And how can we then better manage the visitor flows? How can we spread the benefits better? So I think this is very much, as I say, a collective action. There's a need to more closely integrate tourism with other policies, transport, investment, environment, for example, to support a more strategic long-term approach to tourism based on sustainability principles. And this needs to go beyond government cycles also. So I think that's also where having a long-term strategic strategy really helps to frame that. Making the business case also for more sustainable tourism practices, more sustainable investment practices within the sector is also an issue, even in terms of where our investment and financing are coming from. Are we using green investment tools within the sector, as well as what we in tourism are doing? But what about our suppliers? What about where we're sourcing our products? I thought it might be useful to bring a couple of concrete examples of what countries are doing. I think here, the Tourism Action Plan here in Ireland has already been mentioned. I think that's a very concrete initiative, and the work we're doing in the OECD is feeding into that. But one of the other OECD members that I think is very active in this area, and I think could be an interesting example for Ireland to look at, is Austria. So Austria recently introduced a new master plan for tourism, which lays down guidelines for sustainable tourism development of the sector. Tourism is now part of the Ministry for Sustainable Tourism. The master plan is supplemented by an action plan to tackle challenges, promoting the use of renewable energy by tourism businesses, improving climate-friendly mobility, rethinking the approach to destination management, and creating an appropriate framework conditions and a business environment. And food, building closer linkages between food and agriculture is a key part of this strategy as well. So I think this is an interesting example for Ireland to look at within the context of the Tourism Action Plan as well, but also from an industry perspective. Going to the other side of the world, in Australia, there has been an adaptation strategy developed in relation to climate change. And this is a tourism response plan that Queensland has developed, and it essentially provides a roadmap or a vision for future-proofing the tourism industry. And it's built around 6 priority areas of action, linked with stewardship and education of natural resources, greening of the tourism sector, product diversification, and so forth. So this is an action plan that's been developed in conjunction with industry. So I think, again, it sets out a common vision in relation to some of these issues. And finally, just to move next door to New Zealand, and I think this is to highlight an initiative which is very much driven by industry. So it's developed by industry for industry. And this is an initiative, the Tourism Sustainability Commitment, which aims to ensure that every tourism business in the country is committed to sustainability by 2025. So businesses are invited to take a tourism sustainability commitment, and in doing so, these businesses sign up to 14 business commitments, which in turn feed into achieving industry-wide goals. And these commitments relate to, for example, sustainable supply chains, quality of employment, waste management, carbon reduction, local employment satisfaction. So I'm just looking at my time and I realise I'm really quite behind already, but I think I wanted to focus on the sustainability. I had my notes, but with the discussions I'd already had and with the interventions already, I had doubled my notes by the time I stood up to speak. But so to mention some of the other areas that this work was focusing on, and that we're in the OECD, we're continuing to work with governments on. I think the transport issue is key. It's already been raised, and not just about getting to the destination, but moving around the destination and travel mobility. So we have higher forecast growth in air travel, rail, cruise passenger numbers. So this raises issues in terms of the infrastructure, in terms of the investment to provide that infrastructure. How are we going to finance that? But also in terms of the sustainability of this infrastructure and sustainability of this travel. It also raises issues around enhancing travel facilitation and border security and so forth as well. One potential scenario that we have is that the future is characterised by freedom and ease of movement, and connectivity is greatly improved with low carbon travel options growing. Another potential scenario is people are dissuaded from travelling. Safety and security concerns, and disregard for climate action means that extreme weather is affecting tourism, so it's more downside impacts. In terms of preparing for this and maybe changing or shaping that future from a tourism perspective, this involves taking steps, as I say, to ensure that tourism is considered as part of the transport planning process and inputting in there, and industry has a key role to play there. But as a sector, I think we also need to be looking at supporting alternative sustainability mobility in tourism. This could involve, for example, providing infrastructure to facilitate electric vehicle touring. Electric vehicles are great, but where do you plug it in? Where do you charge? We need the infrastructure there before we can develop the touring routes, which are based around that infrastructure and so forth. But human-powered mobility options there are something which we can already move. And Ireland, with the greenways and with this vision for integrated network of greenways, that is the kind of thinking that is moving in that direction as well. That require, there are infrastructure requirements, but maybe more within the control as well of the tourism sector. So I think this is New Zealand, as I said, is very much looking at some of these environmental issues, the access to New Zealand, and the impact of tourism on the environment. But it is one of the responses they've had is actually to introduce a new transport levy for all international visitors to New Zealand, and this is to help finance some of the infrastructure that is needed around New Zealand to support sustainable tourism development. So I think when we're talking about levies and so forth, I think it's getting that balance between how can we finance what we need in tourism versus how is this impacting the competitiveness of the sector as well. So again, it's quite a complex area. I think in one example I wanted to highlight is from Slovenia, because in the context of Ljubljana, it's an interesting one. The city has been recognised by the 2019 European Smart Tourism Award for its sustainability efforts, including its innovative approach to transport. So the Urbana card gives visitor access to an integrated transport system. Visitors use the card, they travel by bus, they can use it for shared bikes, they can use it to pay for parking, they can use it to take a cable car. Private vehicles are banned from the centre of the city, but visitors can get around on a zero emissions electric train. So I think this is taking place within the wider context of where Slovenia is positioning itself as well as a green destination. Okay, 2 minutes, thank you. So I think there's two parallel challenges that we see that we're seeing very much in our discussions with countries. One is sustainability and these issues that we've discussed. Another is digitalization. So I think just to mention this in terms of the sector as a whole, we know how much the digital revolution is impacting the sector. I don't think we need to go into that. In terms of where that leaves the sector in terms of sustainability, surely there's potential for us to look at technologies that can help us to improve the sustainability of the sector and to help cut the carbon footprint of travel. We could see, for example, a scenario where virtual reality means people could mean tourists can try before you buy. and technology advances, as I say, could cut the carbon footprint of tourism. But on the other hand, virtual reality may mean, let's think about it, people don't travel. You have virtual reality. Do you need to travel? So there's, I think the future is, these are the kind of things that help stimulate our thinking and maybe push us into reacting and going, actually, no, we want people to, we want to have a tourism sector. So that drives us into pushing for some of the sustainable developments that we need to be making. Two key issues just to mention that we see within this area of digital. First is taking steps to support tourism SMEs to use these digital, and also in terms of ensuring their operations are more sustainable, to take advantage of new technologies, whether it be solar and so forth. And the other is around the tourism workforce. So just to mention, I'm out of time. So Spain is maybe a destination that it would be good to look at. They're very much using technology in terms of sustainability, transforming their model of tourism development. I think that's a very interesting example for Ireland to look at and to see what they're doing in terms of really building a new model of tourism development that's based on sustainable principles. I think one word just to mention is in terms of visitor demand. So this is at the end, but actually it should probably be at the beginning, because we are a consumer-driven industry, and really we need to be taking into account where the market is going. The market is moving towards sustainability. The market is demanding that from the industry as well. So we as a sector need to be moving in that direction. So I'm out of time, but I think that's, that will be my key message from there. So thank you very much for the invitation to participate today. This has been a bit of a whirlwind through some of the work, some ideas. As I said, I had my notes and I doubled my notes for the first half within, so hence I've gone way over time. But thank you very much.